Hi, I'm Damian Lenchek, the Director of Cemeteries for the Diocese of Madison. I want to give you a quick introduction to Catholic cemeteries. First, we'll talk about the significance of cemeteries in Catholic practice and offer a reflection on why Catholics bury their dead, drawn mostly from Scripture. I have a couple of degrees in theology, and so that's where my mind goes first when I think about these things. Then I'll go over the decisions you have to make at the cemetery so you can start thinking about what you prefer. It's better for you to make those decisions now and make them known to your family than to have your family guessing at them on the worst day of their life. Next, we'll discuss the costs that you'll meet at the cemetery, and then we'll discuss a few considerations about when you should make your cemetery plans. And finally, we'll wrap up with a little Q&A. So let's get started. All right, so let's talk about why Catholics bury their dead. It's very human to bury your dead. Uh, Throughout history, burial and cremation are the two most popular that you see as far as what to do with the remains of people that we've lived with and people who've been in our community, in our family. Catholics, throughout most of their history, have buried their dead. And so we have a picture here of the catacombs. Um, and so, right from the very beginning, you know that Christians were burying their dead. And it goes back even further than that. The Christian tradition grows out of the Jewish tradition. So the Jews, God's chosen people, were guided by God throughout salvation history. And the Hebrew scriptures are the Christian Old Testament. That's what we look to see um, to see kind of how God leads his people. So if we look at Abraham, our father in faith, uh, so he is a nomad. He's wandering around. He's a wealthy guy, um, and his wife Sarah dies when they are near a Hittite city, and so he goes and he has to buy a grave from the Hittites because being a nomad, he didn't own any property, and the Hittites kind of take advantage of him. Uh, he lets it be known that this is not um, he doesn't want to bury his wife where the Hittites bury their people, and that's probably because they're pagans and he worships the one God. Um, so he ends up paying 400 silver shekels, an exorbitant sum for this grave. Uh, so you can see right in the beginning, uh, we, the earliest of God's chosen people are burying their dead. And then if you fast forward a little bit, um, if you look in the book of Tobit, and now this is one of the books that's in the Catholic Bible, but it's not in a Protestant Bible. A great book. I highly recommend it. So uh, Tobit is a righteous man, and he's in exile in Nineveh, which is near Mosul, Iraq today. Um, so, so the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and took the people into captivity, and they're treating them badly in captivity. They're trying to wear them down, um, have them integrate and forget their old ways of doing things. But Tobit is faithful to God's commandments and he's trying to live a godly life. And one of the things he does is buries his countrymen. So Jews didn't have that many rights in Nineveh, and so they would die and be thrown over the city wall, and often they were being killed. Um, Definitely second class citizens. So, but what Tobit would do, he would go secretly bury Jews who were thrown over the city wall, and and then and even he would even bury people who were killed in the street. Um, and he paid a big price for this, and there's a whole long story that goes along with it. But the point is that one of the characters you meet in the book of Tobit is the archangel Raphael, and Raphael says that he has seen the righteous work that Tobit's been doing in burying the dead. And really the source text for um, why Catholics consider burying the dead to be a corporal work of mercy. It's something good you can do for somebody else, and um, and it's right in there along with feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. So it's really a uh, beautiful reflection passage. So those are two examples out of the Old Testament. Let's look at two examples from the New Testament. Uh, think of Lazarus. Lazarus is sick. A messenger goes to Jesus, says, "Your friend Lazarus is sick. Come and heal him." Jesus waits 2 days where he is, and then he goes to Bethany. And by the time he gets to Bethany, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. So this is, right away, this tells us uh, Jews at Jesus's time buried their dead. Lazarus is in the tomb. And then we go a little further in the story. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And this is a great miracle. And it also tells us that Jesus has power over death. And this is, um, the beginning of our understanding that we have this hope that the tomb is not the end of the story. As a result of raising Lazarus, uh, Jesus himself is crucified, died, and is buried. Joseph of Arimathea donates his own tomb to Jesus, and by Jesus's 3 days in the tomb, he sanctifies the tomb for us. And so this is really the main answer. I would say the first answer to why Catholics bury their dead. We bury our dead in imitation of Jesus. We know that Jesus was laid in a tomb, and we know that he rose 3 days later from the tomb. Uh, and so we trust in him that as we are laid in the tomb, that's not our final resting spot. And in fact, if you look at the etymology of the word cemetery, if you do a little word study, you look at the root, it comes from the Greek. I'm not even going to attempt it here because my Greek is really rusty, but it basically means dormitory or sleeping place. And and this is really appropriate if we think about the way Jesus spoke about death. Um, you think of you think he often used sleep as uh, a euphemism, but maybe not so much a euphemism as a truth about what death is. So in Mark's gospel, he goes to where the sick child is. They tell him the child has died. He says, "She hasn't died, she's sleeping." He throws out the mourners and he goes in with Peter, James, and John and raises the little girl from the dead. Uh, she is not dead, but sleeping. And again, we look at the story of Lazarus. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awake him out of sleep. And the apostles are like, "Hey, he's sick. He's sleeping. He'll probably get better if he sleeps." And Jesus has to kind of roll his eyes and they're like, "Look, guys, he's dead. Okay. And I'm going to go raise him." So uh, this is the foundation of our hope. Okay. So let's talk about the decisions that you have to make at the cemetery. And these are things that you want to think about now, uh, before you really have to, and you can make your wishes known to your family, uh, so they won't have to guess. So the first decision you have to make: do you want to be buried in the ground or above ground? So in the ground, uh, we have that's your traditional grave. Above the ground, we have mausoleums and columbariums. Uh, So, different people like different things, and that's something you should think about. Uh, Second, are you going to do full body burial or cremation? Now, the church prefers full body burial because it preserves the sign value of the body um, much better than cremation. Uh, the church allows cremation, and so there's not a problem with choosing cremation if you're choosing it for reasons that are not contrary to the faith. But certainly the church does prefer uh, full body burial, and there's some practical uh, issues with cremation that you should consider. Um, more than half of those who are cremated never get laid to rest in a cemetery, and a lot of the times, uh, you know, there's all sorts of possible problems from abandonment to scattering to mixing, dividing. These are things that some people do with cremated remains, but these are not options for Catholics. Uh, so, and those problems aren't necessarily attached to cremation, but they're only problems that happen when someone chooses cremation. Um, so that's one of the big decisions you're going to have to make. Say you're going to choose in-ground burial. Would you like a flat marker, kind of like the ones in the foreground of this picture, or an upright monument? Uh, and that's what we frequently consider uh, you know a gravestone or a headstone. Um, but in our cemeteries, they are maybe half and half. Um, the flat markers are not as expensive. The upright markers are more expensive. Uh, and then there's matters of taste and all that. Um, if you're going to be buried in the ground, uh, a standard grave also requires the purchase of a vault. Um, and a vault is a concrete box that keeps the ground from collapsing after a number of years. Uh, Most of our cemeteries have lawn crypts as well. A lawn crypt has the vault already in place, and so then we would open the vault up and lower your casket in. Uh, so so that's one of the options you can get into uh, when you talk to your family service advisor. If you choose above ground, uh, there's often a choice of whether you want to be inside or outside. We have chapel mausoleums at our cemeteries, and uh, and so those are the inside spots. Here in Wisconsin, it gets very cold, and so the inside spots are very nice for your visitors. Um, Outside is is also an option. And then if you're thinking about making plans as a couple, uh, there's a number of different packages for um, having two graves side by side, or if you are going to go above ground, you could have two crypts in a mausoleum, or we have some crypts that are together and hold two caskets. We have niches that hold two urns. So those are all possibilities and things you should go over with your family services counselor when you speak with them. Um, Another option that I should mention, you can have one grave uh, where the first person in the grave can go full body and the second person can go in as a cremation. So, so this is called second right of burial. Normally, when we sell a grave, we sell one right of burial. You get the right to be buried there, but that's one person. And if you want more than that, there's a second right of burial. It's not as expensive as the first right, um, and there's some limitations depending on the location you choose. All right, let's talk a little bit about the money. What are the four costs that you're going to encounter at the cemetery? And let's just lay it right out there. First, you need a spot to be buried, a grave, or if you're going above ground, a mausoleum crypt or a niche in a columbarium. Uh, so, so that's cost number one. And you don't, um, it's not exactly like real estate because you don't own it. What you are purchasing is the right to be buried there. So we retain ownership rights, but you have the right to be buried there. Um, uh, the second cost is the vault. Now, a vault at its most basic is just it's a concrete box that the casket goes in the ground, and it keeps the earth uh, from collapsing as nature does its duty to our mortal remains. We're going to be mowing the lawn and going across there, and people are going to be visiting, and we don't want them to, have any dangerous surprises and going into the ground or anything like that. So that's everybody is most cemeteries require vaults, and and all of our cemeteries do. Uh, then there's the monument. There's a whole wide range of monuments. This monument is in one of our cemeteries, and you know, so some monuments are flat to the ground, some monuments are upright. Um, there's uh, if you're in a crypt or a niche, there's a bronze plaque or some lettering, and so your monument costs are going to be kind of dependent on the kind of burial you choose. Uh, that's uh, one of the four basic costs. And finally, burial fees are the fees we collect to actually do the work of burying you, of digging the grave, but also of caring for your grave in perpetuity. So from the time you're buried, we expect to be taking care of your grave until Christ returns. That's that's really what we're planning for. And so um, sometimes people express surprise at how much burial fees are, but if you think about the long term, it's really a very reasonable rate, and that's what is going on there. I should say a word about financing. We do offer in-house financing at all of our cemeteries, and the terms change from time to time. Right now, as I'm speaking here in 2020, um, we have offered interest-free financing with certain conditions and limitations, uh, but you're not going to get better than that. And so, everybody is going to need a grave, and we want to make it accessible to everybody um, from a cost perspective. All right, so let's talk a little bit about when you should make your cemetery arrangements. And sometimes in places, before a woman could get married, she had to own a grave. So that was a trigger. If she wanted to get married, she had to own a grave. Now, why was that? Well, given the high maternal death rates in sometimes in places, uh, this was one of the rules that they would have. Um, that's not the case today. But think about cemetery arrangements kind of like life insurance or wills. These are ways of taking care of your family, of making kind of the big structural decisions and kind of laying them out so that you can take care of your family when you're not there. Um, it By taking care of it ahead of time, you're preventing arguments and and laying out your wishes very clearly. Um, so so think about making your arrangements with the cemetery before contacting the funeral home. And I say this because we we Catholic cemeteries are nonprofit organizations, and so on those things where we overlap a little bit with the funeral homes, we're going to give you a better deal. Uh, and I've seen this multiple times where people have gone to the funeral home and then they come to us and they find out what our prices are on, say, a vault, and they're shocked that they paid so much at the funeral home. Um, it's also, we are part of the Catholic Church, and so uh, in coming to us first, you're really supporting Catholic cemeteries, um, and we appreciate that very much. So, like life insurance, after a major life event, that's when you want to think about making your cemetery arrangements, whether you're getting married or say your last child graduates from college and you're used to paying out the big bucks, and now maybe the pressure is off a little bit. Um, at that point, you want to come and make your cemetery arrangements when there's a little bit of room in the budget. Or say you're looking at retirement. Uh, this is something that uh, you could be a trigger for you to think, hey, I should make my cemetery arrangements. But whatever you do, you should make your cemetery arrangements ahead of time. Make them before they are needed. Um, just spare your family the decision making, which is uh, expensive. It's um, it's something that they need to get educated in. Uh, with some of these decisions that we've gone through, if they don't know what your wishes are, they're going to have to guess at them. And, in some families, there's arguments about what mom would have wanted. And, and you just want to prevent all that. So make your arrangements ahead of time. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the common questions that I get as director of cemeteries for the Diocese of Madison. Some people ask me about green burials. Green burials are environmentally friendly burials. The intent behind green burials is to lessen the environmental impact of being buried. In most of the world, um, what they do is what we call green burial. When they put a body in the ground, there's no embalming. Uh, Often there's no casket, there's no vault. Um, so that is what here in the US we would call a deep green burial. Uh, at the Catholic cemetery right now, we can accommodate light green burials. What does that mean? Um, so we don't require embalming. There's no state law or any guidelines that require embalming. And we can put you in the ground in contact with the earth. And then we still require a vault. And so we just don't use the bottom of the vault. And we put the top of the vault uh, right over the body. And so currently, all of the diocesan cemeteries can accommodate light green burials. I'm doing research into the possibility of deep green burials. If you're interested in that, let me know. Um, and it's good for me to have that feedback from people about uh, what they are interested in. But it's completely consistent with uh, the mind of the church. Uh, we are stewards of creation, and we should consider what is our impact on creation. Um, what impact does embalming have on creation versus, um, you know, what some of these more common options. Uh, so yes, green burial is a good Catholic thing to do, and you can look into it. And I know all the funeral homes have information on that as well. Non-Catholic spouses. Can my spouse, who's not Catholic, be buried in a Catholic cemetery? Yes. It used to be the case 40 or more years ago that um, that this was generally not permitted, but now, the way I say it, if you know somebody, we can get you in. Uh, if if your spouse is Catholic, by all means, you can be buried next to your spouse. Um, yeah, so that's an easy one. Somebody asked me whether we accept Trappist caskets. There's a Trappist monastery. Um, they don't sell pound cake. They sell caskets that they make, and this is a great thing to do. Um, and absolutely, we're a Catholic cemetery. We accept. We don't reject almost any casket, and certainly we'd be happy to have a Trappist casket in our cemetery. Um, the only time you run into problems with caskets is if they are oversized, and an oversized casket requires an oversized vault, and not all of our graves can accommodate an oversized vault. So, uh, so that's something to consider when you're making your plans. But Trappist caskets, yes. How can I be sure of a Catholic burial if my kids aren't practicing? This is just a heartbreaking situation. I've heard these stories. A daily mass goer dies, their kids aren't practicing, the kids never tell the parish, and the person doesn't get a Catholic funeral or a Catholic burial. And and so if you're a faithful Catholic, you want a Catholic funeral, you want a Catholic burial in sacred ground. And and so you have to do a couple of things. Number one, you have to make your wishes known. You should write them down. You should write them down and make copies and give one to your parish and give them to your kids, and consider, if your kids aren't practicing and they just don't share your convictions about the faith, perhaps make the executor of your estate somebody who does share your convictions. But in any case, um, step number one is to make your wishes known, and step number two, and this is very practical, uh, you know, pay for it ahead of time. Lower that barrier so that uh, you know if your kids know your wishes, and uh, and it's easy to follow them, even if they don't agree with them, they'll they'll probably do it. So those are the two big things. Um, Make your wishes known in writing, and pay for things ahead of time. Uh, if there's a third thing you can do, you can write it into your will that inheritance is contingent on uh, a Catholic funeral and burial. But at that point, you really have to consider um, whether you want your kids to be the executor of your estate, or somebody who really shares your faith, if you're having to go to those lengths. So, not legal advice, but just something to consider. Why does the church consider burial better than cremation? And we talked about this a little bit, but the sign value of burying the body rather than burying cremated remains is just much more powerful. It speaks much more powerfully to our belief in the resurrection of the body. It respects the dignity of the body. As the baptized, our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and that's something that we want to express from first to last. And and so it's just better at doing that. For most of the history of the church, cremation is not something that Catholics did or were allowed to do, and the reason is that the enemies of Christians would burn their bodies as if to say, resurrect that. It was a way of challenging the belief in the resurrection, and that's this doesn't challenge our belief in the resurrection. We know that the God who created everything can certainly restore our bodies to us no matter what has happened to them. And really, all of us are returning to the dust from which we were made. And so at the end of time, no matter what has happened to our mortal remains, our bodies are going to be restored to us. Um, but it's that sign value. The It really enhances our faith uh, when we bury the body rather than cremate. There's an additional reason that cremation opens up a whole uh, a, a whole lot of problems. So, and this is related to this next question. Can my cremated remains be mixed with my spouse's? I get this question. You'd be surprised, maybe. Um, no, no. We treat human cremated remains uh, the same way, with the same respect that we treat the body when we go to bury the body. And so this is why we don't do scattering of ashes. We don't do mixing of ashes. We don't divide ashes so that, you know, brother in California and sister in New York can have a piece of me. That's no. The people do that, but that's not a Catholic sensibility. When when we choose cremation, we keep the cremated remains together in a dignified vessel, an urn, and we lay them to rest on sacred ground. We don't bake them into jewelry or any of these things that you see these days. All right, what does the church say about donating my body to science? It You may do that. You may, and I know the University of Wisconsin has a program for donating your body to science, and this can be a beautiful thing to do. Uh, Doctors need cadavers to perform autopsies on the first time to practice and get to know the human body. And they're very careful, to treat the body with dignity. And then, afterwards, uh, the and that's like a year or two later, usually. At that point, your remains would be cremated, and there should be a plan. And when you sign up for this program, they tell you, they, what are your wishes after science is done with your body. And for a Catholic, the answer should be, I'd like to be cremated, because that's really the only option afterwards, and then laid to rest on sacred ground. And so you should put those pieces in place and get it all set up. But uh, but the short answer is yes, you can donate your body to science. Um, Somebody asked me about this new thing that they're doing in some places. They're composting uh, human remains, and and who knows what they're going to come up with next. I know there's also a uh, alkaline hydrolysis is one of the new things. It's um, it, where they dissolve the remains in a chemical, and there's lots of ways to dispose of the body, but the Catholic way is burial, and cremation is permitted. These other ways, we would say, do not respect the dignity of the body, the dignity of the baptized believer whose body was the temple of the Holy Spirit. It doesn't um, it doesn't communicate our faith in the resurrection as well. So there, and it's getting clearer and clearer. There are people out there motivated by things other than the faith, um, and so they might say, composting is a very environmentally friendly way to do things, but that's not the only consideration. We have to consider our eternal destiny and our faith and our hope in Jesus Christ. So those are um, a few of those questions. If you have any other questions, get in touch with me. Um, If you are interested in making your cemetery arrangements, give one of our cemeteries a call. They would be happy to help you. Their information will be on the next slide. And until then, God bless you, and thanks for watching.